Hi everyone, my name is Melissa Chan and I'll be leading this session called How Disinformation Manipulates Us and What We Can Do About It. So we're just going to get going straight away. I'm going to invite the panelists on stage and to have a seat. So welcome to Renee DiResta with Georgetown University, and actually Renee, you wear many different hats you can talk about. We also have Tandin Wangmo, who is the Executive Director of the Bhutan Center for Media and Democracy. And we have Maria Paula Murcia, who is the Analyst and Impact Editor for Mutante. So thank you so much. We are going to have a Q&A section. I'm going to try to get to it as early as possible. So start thinking of your questions. And yeah, we'll get going on that in a bit. But first of all, I want to ask each of you if you could introduce yourselves a little bit more beyond the bio in the program and tell us what you're doing these days. Let's start down that way with Renee.
Sure. Is this on? Okay, great. Hi, Renee DiResta. I'm at Georgetown McCourt School of Public Policy and the Massive Data Institute. Prior to that, for about 5 years, I was at Stanford Internet Observatory. I've studied adversarial abuse, basically how malign actors abuse information technologies. I've done that for the better part of a decade. A lot of focus on state actor information operations for quite some time now. My other affiliation is Lawfare, so I write quite a bit. I was up at 3 a.m. this morning, wide awake, jet lagged, filing some work on the recent kind of retconning in the United States of Russian information operations in 2016. We have a pretty novel relationship to information in our own government these days. So that's what I do, but a lot of focus on state actors as well as spammers, scammers, and then just propaganda campaigns writ large. And I wrote a book called Invisible Rulers, The People Who Turn Lies into Reality, just kind of chronicling the last 10 years and how propaganda campaigns have transformed.
Great. Tandin.
Hi, good evening, I'm Tandin. Thank you, Melissa, for introducing my name. I don't have a book that I've written, but what I've done is I currently work in the Bhutan Center for Media and Democracy. It's a local civil society organization that works towards empowering people. And by people, we talk about people in an inclusive manner. So before that, I've worked in the government for close to 20 years. I worked in the area of programming where I worked with young people, with children coming in conflict with law, then with women, especially the underprivileged, vulnerable groups. And later on, I also worked in development aid coordination for the government in the Planning Commission, which used to be called the Gross National Happiness Commission. I was focal for UN agencies, and that's where I got introduced to many of these things happening around the world. And that has been very useful for me, very reflective as I moved on. And before I moved into the civil society sector, I was looking after the local development plans. So in Bhutan, we have these 5-year planning process being done for both central agencies as well as local governments. So I was leading the program for local governments. And that kind of piqued my interest to actually continue my work, because I'm a spiritual person, but I'm a born Buddhist. And as a born Buddhist, I believe that it was meant to be that for me to see how I could play a part in empowering people. And that's how in 2023, I decided to leave the civil service and join a sector that works in empowering people, of making people realize their potential and find a voice. Because I come from a simple middle-income family, and for me, education really helped me to be able to express myself. And I could only be heard when I spoke. And I felt that that was my calling, and this is what got me into the civil society space, where I'm happy, and I'm here, happy at Bonn, and speaking to you all. Thank you very much.
I think it's on already.
Hello, my name is Maria Paula Murcia Huertas. I am co-founder and editor at Mutante, which is an independent media outlet based in Colombia. And we work around 4 topics: human rights, climate emergency, mental health, and gender issues. And we do participatory journalism around these issues to engage in different ways with the audiences and help tackle disinformation with this methodology. So thank you for the invitation.
Great. I want to start by just sort of going back to the title of the session, what we can do about it. And one thing in planning was sort of flipping the script, because we tend to look at misinformation, disinformation as a cause caused by big tech, caused by state actors. And I wonder about individual responsibility. When surveys are done by The Guardian or by other media organizations, including at DW, and they ask people what they want from the news, they'll say things like constructive journalism, we really care about the world, we want to learn more about the world, please cover more of the global south. But the reality is that people click on the cat videos, on the dancing videos, on the memes, they doom scroll, they are not looking at constructive journalism. So are we, the individuals, to a certain extent, also culpable in spreading disinformation and misinformation? I don't know who wants to start, but maybe start with Renee and go down the line again.
So one of the things that we see is that disinformation is often very rarely false. It's often unfalsifiable. It takes the form of, I think propaganda is the term that we should be using much more often than we do. When we talk about, I spent quite a lot of time in the last 48 hours actually reviewing Russian information operations in the US around the 2015 to 2018 timeframe. Only very rarely was any of that information false or fact-checkable, right? It was political opinions that were being inauthentically amplified. The mission of a tech platform might be to take down the inauthentic amplification, and that is in fact what they began to do. So there were some very clear, bright lines when you could say these accounts are fake, these accounts are bots, these accounts are trolls in St. Petersburg pretending to be Americans. There's a clear, bright line there. But most of the opinions that were being expressed, opinions around, for example, Texas should secede from the United States, that's an opinion that real Americans hold, and so that is not something that is going to be moderated away. You're not going to respond to that opinion through moderation. So then you get to questions like when you get at disinformation campaigns that particularly are domestically spread, right, that come from a community where the reason that it is happening is because it politically it advantages a particular party politically or a particular community politically. The response to that has to come from other communities. It's not something that a platform is going to respond to. And so in that particular case, the better response is something like counterspeech. Right? It is something like one of the things that I think is actually quite a positive intervention is the community notes model. I don't think it's particularly well executed right now, and if you want to, we can talk about why or how to make that better from a technological standpoint. But it is an area where it enjoys a high degree of legitimacy because the correction comes from other members of the community. I think that there are roles and opportunities for journalism to insert itself into that process, to put good information out there. It's very hard for somebody sitting on their couch to fact check the dynamics of an event that happens somewhere in the world. That's something where journalism is quite clearly needed. But there are other areas where the sort of processing or contextualization of an event can actually come from a community, by a community, so that other members of a community can see it. And that's where I think that agency, also making people recognize the role that they play in the amplification process. Things don't just go viral. They go viral because a lot of people hit a button at the same time. The algorithm keys off of actions that people take. When you put it in those terms, when you explain that virality isn't a magical act that like manifests out of nowhere, then I think you help people understand the role that collective behavior plays in spreading information, and that shifts a little bit of their thinking around the role that they themselves play and the agency that they themselves have. But in the moment, it's very hard for them to refrain from taking that action because the desire to share feels so compelling.
Are you seeing any evidence that community notes are being manipulated by certain actors? Or is it more like a Wikipedia thing where actually the collective work does work?
The answer is that it's very hard to tell. X has recently kind of shifted its algorithm a little bit, sort of the bridging algorithm, alleging that there was some brigading that was trying to make notes clear in inauthentic ways. They do that transparently. You can see how they're changing the code. It's actually, which I do think is quite good that they make that transparent. The question of like who is behind that, they're not disclosing, and that I think, unfortunately, I would say maybe up until 2022, there were very strong working relationships between academics and when it was Twitter. Those relationships don't exist anymore, and we don't see those kinds of disclosures from the platform. So we don't actually have a real clear way to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Tandon, what are your thoughts in terms of individual responsibility and whether we are also at fault?
For me, I think it's an individual responsibility we talk about, and why I think it goes back to my journey as well, why I made the shift, because I took it as an individual responsibility. When working in the government, I was there talking about policies, but I realized that people at the grassroots, in the communities, actually they do not care, and not do not care, but they are not aware about what happens in boardrooms, how it affects them, how it influences them, and also like how it kind of shapes up their behavior, right? So this was an opportunity for me to actually help them understand it better. And this is where like governments and others can only do so much. They can bring out reports, whatever, like whether it is AI generated fake news or disinformation, misinformation. It is as good as like giving value to each individual, whether they are sitting in boardrooms or sitting in a village far away, toiling down, making a living for themselves and their families. And this is where I think as an individual responsibility, what I took upon myself was we need to be able to translate policy discussions, boardroom discussions into things that people understand as to how disinformation and misinformation can actually mislead them. And that's where they need to prepare themselves. Information is going to be out. There are going to be conspiracy theories. There are going to be so many, whether it is fact-based or disinformation, information is going to be out. But it's as how each user consumes the news, right? So you don't just read and share and click a button for the sake of doing that, but you do it mindfully. You should be aware about what you are reading, what you're consuming out. Most importantly, what you're sharing, because for Bhutan, I can talk very confidently about my own country and its context because it's a small community. And until and unless these things you are mindful as an individual, we run the risk of disharmony among ourselves. And we are barely 800,000 people. And the only strength we have is how we can work together collectively, progressively, and in nurturing democracy. We look at empowering people to take responsibility for themselves, because the world is a messy place. You can't trust your happiness in somebody else's policy decisions. So what happens? If you're better informed, I think in a democracy, you at least have the choice of voting for, you use your agency to actually vote for the party or the person or the ideology that you believe in. So I feel that this is one way of empowering. Getting that individual responsibility. Yeah.
I think there are interesting particulars of Bhutan being so small that I want to go back to asking you about the importance of community and building trust. But first of all, going to Maria and hoping that you have some thoughts on the question that I posed earlier. And if you're just joining us, just a reminder of the question, which is, do we have individual responsibility? Are we culpable in spreading disinformation? Or, as Renee says, the better term, perhaps propaganda?
I think, yes, everyone has responsibility. It doesn't mean that only the people that spread disinformation willingly or very on purpose have culpability. We all have. And I think if we acknowledge our collective responsibility, it is easier to tackle it. I also think there is more complexity to the culpability around spreading disinformation. I think if we look at the nuances of how people are actually spreading disinformation and are willingly engaging with disinformation, you can find a lot of exhaustion. You can find a lot of maybe a desire to connect with something else that just drives people to click on that, to maybe just don't live up to the standards they are asking in the surveys that you cited about. Yeah, we want to listen to constructive stories. We want to know more about the world, and I think there is a complexity around that we should explore. And I think that we are also culpable in not being willing to ask the people why are they doing that in a very transparent way. What happens if we to ask people if we are willing to engage with them and actually ask, okay, so you are saying that you want this, but you're actually not consuming this. So how can we do our job better so that you are willing to consume and therefore collectively construct the solution, but also acknowledge that there is not only a good side and a bad side, but that there is something that's more complex and that we all play a part in that.
Can you talk a little bit more? Can you perhaps give an example of that working, where you're trying to counter disinformation, or you're trying to better understand those consuming the news from your portal, and what works and what doesn't?
Sure. I mean, I think that we've been having a very mindful conversation about audience scale in Latin America specifically, and that's the context I come from and that I can talk about. And I think there is a matter of scale in which, if you think about audiences in a very big scale, you don't really, or maybe my newsroom and I know other Latin American newsrooms don't have the capacity to actually engage meaningfully with these audiences. But when you shift the scale and when you start looking at audiences in another perspective, and you actually lower the scale in a sense that you can know and meaningfully engage with your audiences, then you can ask stuff and you can receive answers and you can build a relationship that is based on trust, and then you can answer the needs of that audience. So we at Mutante, what we are doing is registering the comments that we are receiving. Sometimes it is a few amounts, sometimes it is a much bigger amount, but we register them in what we call a comments library. So we have 5 categories in which disinformation is one of them. And when we actually start registering the comments and meaningfully listening to what people are saying in the comments, and we are able to get that and register in the category, then we are able to measure tendencies. Okay, so disinformation is coming from these, but we're actually also able to answer. So, okay, you are commenting on something, or you are sharing something that might come from a disinformation point of view. Why do you think this? Where did you hear this? Where did it come from? Have you asked yourself what's behind this? And that's the way in which we can actually build a different kind of relationship and understand what's behind that, so that we can answer in a more pertinent way. And I think that's also what journalism based on dialogue, based on conversation, and based on a constructive, and a collective knowledge construction point of view can achieve. And I think that is also a very interesting point of shifting the scales of how you think about audiences, and that's how we've been doing it.
Okay. Chantin, I know that you work a lot on media literacy. How important is that? How have you seen the impact of it in terms of has it been positive? And after you've trained young people in media literacy in terms of their ability to engage with social media, for example?
Thank you, Melissa. This is one area of work where the Bhutan Center for Media and Democracy, we heavily invest in. When we initially started, it was before me, but when the organization started way back in 2008, that was when the country kind of embraced democracy as a democratic constitutional monarchy. And that's when the work started in terms of the need to actually educate people in terms of, the media literacy. It was basically trying to make people understand what democracy can do for them, but at the same time their roles. Because the state can only do so much, so what can civil society actors do? What are the responsibilities? So this is how it came about. And while initially there was a lot of work done with journalists as well, because even the private media sector was just picking up. There were very few private media. Even today we just have, it's too huge, I think, for a small country our size. There are 7 media houses, including a broadcast and both the broadcast and one state-owned media house, and then the others are private. It's kind of huge, but it started with work by the center in terms of media literacy. Over the years, there are 2 other actors who actually do this media literacy program, but one thing is it focuses a lot in terms of with the adults. So what we do increasingly is like looking at how can we sustain it, and the media and democracy clubs in schools and colleges is something that we have focused on, because that is one place where you can actually, you have the future voters there. You have an opportunity to actually educate them that they do not fall prey to, or even if they fell prey to, it should be by choice. It's that they are at least informed and they know what they are getting into. So the media and democracy programs, as I speak here, we have a program ongoing in one of the districts, which is about 5 hours drive from the capital. We are training the media club coordinators from 15 educational institutes. So this is basically to ensure that there is a multiplier effect, right? So that we are resource constrained. We do not have the luxury of having the high-tech equipments to do this and that. So, but what we do is we use human connections. How can we make use of what we have? So these are things that the media and democracy clubs are one program that we heavily invest in, where we not only talk about, it's not a propaganda kind of thing. Mm-hmm. We make sure that there we try people, make people think critically. There we do not tell them what is right, what is wrong. We do talk to them about their rights. It could be about the child rights. It could be about women's rights. It could be about fundamental rights, about the constitutional rights that we talk to them about. But we also tell them about knowing what are their responsibilities. You cannot exercise your rights alone. With rights come responsibilities as individuals. And I think for us, we take it very seriously and personally that only when each individual, each citizen is empowered to think critically, and I think it will at least be safer for us to be a sovereign and secure state where we work together, because we cannot afford to be chaotic. We are small. Firstly, we are 800,000, but we are made smaller because of our neighbors. Our neighbors are very big, right? So we are relatively made smaller. We understand there are countries with smaller population, like 80,000 and all, but they are not in our position. We cannot change our location right now. So we have to be there. We are wedged there. And it's a reality, and we need to see how can we best equip ourselves to actually face that reality, and also make sure that we continue to be a sovereign state for years to come.
Right.
Forever.
Everything you've described sounds fantastic. Renee, I wonder if that can be scaled in the United States. What are your thoughts about media literacy? And because I know a lot of the work that you look at is so macro, I'd be curious about your thoughts. Do we have examples? I mean, in the United States, it's not federal. Education is not federally sort of controlled. It's down to the county. Right. So I don't know if there's been examples of stellar counties that's rolled out media literacy and whether that's worked or not.
Well, to be clear, that term's been redefined on the right as government brainwashing. So I think you're already sort of fighting the propaganda battle there. I actually think about it. There's two things that I would say. First, I am interested in more what you might call almost digital literacy. I think explaining to people how the structure of platforms works is an immense gap. All right, I used to have conversations with people occasionally on Twitter who would tell me like, oh, my content is being shadow banned. These are accounts with 200 followers, maybe even less than that sometimes. And you say, well, why do you think that? And they would say, because my friends don't see all of my posts. And it was because they didn't understand the basics of algorithmic curation. They did not understand that chronological feeds were not a thing anymore, and that an algorithm somewhere was determining what of their posts their friends would see. And so explaining how a feed is ranked, the idea that there is no neutral, the process by which that happens, the way that a recommender system works, how collaborative filtering identifies why a group might be recommended to you. Meta will occasionally do something where it'll put that little I button there and you can click on it and it can say, like, this post is suggested to you because you're a woman between the ages of 18 and 40 living in the United States. That communicates absolutely nothing, right? There are ways that can be refined far better to actually explain to people the mechanics by which the system works. Then we get at the work that And I don't recommend Noam Chomsky from a political standpoint, to be clear, just to caveat that, but just from the standpoint of what I think manufacturing consent did quite well was it broke down the incentives by which information is created. And I think that explaining how influencers operate today is absolutely critical. This is why new media works the way it does. This is how an influencer makes money. This is how somebody producing content in your Instagram feed actually profits from what they do and what they show you. That kind of education, I think, is absolutely critical. That's not media literacy per se. That's much more an understanding of, again, how the incentives of a system influence the outcomes of a system. And then one of the things that I really, that kind of blew me away when I was doing the research for my book was going back to propaganda education in the United States in the 1930s. Because there was this thing, and I don't know how many people in here, I know that this is a very diverse audience, are familiar with the Institute for Propaganda Analysis. But it was an NGO started by a bunch of academics around the time of radio. This was when radio was the thing. FDR, our president, was doing his fireside chats, and there was this fascist priest by the name of Father Coughlin, who had 30 million listeners at a time when the United States population was 120 million people. Massively influential figure who became more and more of a fascist as the US, as Hitler and Mussolini rise to power, this incredibly influential figure. And what you see is the broadcasters trying to figure out, the people who control the radio stations, what to do about the guy, right? Because they're trying to maximize free expression, they're trying to maximize free speech. They don't want to just say, like, that's it, you're done. They do eventually move into doing that. But what they try to do is they try to kind of fact check him immediately afterwards. And so he'll give his kind of weekly address, and then someone will come on afterwards and they'll say, Father Coughlin lied to you about the following things, and they'll kind of fact check his facts. But what the Institute for Propaganda Analysis does instead is it says, you know what, we're going to teach people to recognize the rhetoric of fascism, these signals, the ways in which propaganda functions from a rhetorical standpoint, the tropes of propaganda. So rather than like getting down and fighting at the facts level, we're going to level that up one, and we're going to teach people to recognize the signals that indicate that they're being misled, or they're being that their emotions are being riled up in ways that they should be taught to recognize. And so they come up with these very interesting kind of, they give them these cute names, card stacking, bandwagoning. And what really blew me away, actually, is when you look at the primary source documents, because they produce these pamphlets for ordinary people in communities, literally high school kids. This is done at the middle school and high school level. They make these little graphics and they just start annotating the speeches. They look like emojis, and this is the 1930s. And they just stick the emoji next to the sentence in the speech. And then they hand them out as pamphlets, basically being like, here you go, here's your annotated speeches for the week. So that it becomes an educational, I don't know if we call it like media literacy in quite the same way. It's not like check multiple sources or the standard ways in which that's taught. And this is a very long answer, sorry. But it is basically that model of saying, here is how we teach this one level up, right? Here's how we level this up. And that's where I think that we need to be at this point.
I think that's also, it sounds like it's more effective in the sense that if you're just chasing and trying to fact check everything, what is that Mark Twain quote about the lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has the chance to tie its shoes? So that goes to the question of speed, which I want to ask both Tanden and Maria. And then I think just with the time, I want to go to questions. So start thinking of your questions. The work that you do is not speedy. It's methodical and thoughtful. Do you worry that you are not able to chase the lie that's gone around halfway around the world in the work that you do? And how do you mitigate that?
Well, no, I'm not worried, because there are people that actually work for that. And I'm very grateful that we have the ability to divide our tasks so that there are newsrooms that go after that try to find that do breaking news. We can do our work just because there are some other people that are doing other things. And I think that that's the very first thing to start. And I think that there is value in slow motion, mm-hmm. in slow work, and in taking the time to find other ways to work. And that's also a privilege, because we have the means to do that. And that's not the case for everyone. So I think that's a privilege, and we try to own it and respond to it with responsibility to our audiences. And that's why we take the time to know them, to ask questions, to actually research the work carefully, thoughtfully, and very accurately, to respond with fact-checked information. so that we can actually start to make a transformation and to drive on cultural change bit by bit, because you don't actually get that through speed. And I think speed actually gets away with the opposite. So our work goes on a different level, and that's why we also operate on a different scale. But if there's enough of us that operate in that different scale, then we might actually achieve something together.
Great. Tended.
I can say we are definitely faster than the governments as CSO. So that's a fact, and I'm happy to be in the space where I can be faster. I could have been slow if I was in the government, but laughters aside, it is still difficult in the sense like it is constrained by resources. I function with a team of 8, which includes myself. But what we also have to advantage in today's age, digital age, is how do we make use of social media, and the digital technologies that we can almost, and thanks to COVID, after COVID, almost every child holds an Android phone at least, because many of the educational resources have been taken online. And it has become a necessity. So children have that. There are schools which are banning children from taking phones into schools, but we have to see, like, when children hold their phones in their hands, how can they make use of? So while it may not be as speedy as we would want it to be, we can't get everything we want in life, but when we hold a phone, I think so long we can make each, and it's not only on the child, but it's also on families and society in terms of how responsibly a child or a person uses that tool. So again, that comes to empowering people to understand both the pros and cons. So in today's day and age, as much as we are constrained in terms of resources, that also slows down our speed. I think using technology, technology helps us to actually reach. For Bhutan, we still have villages which are not connected by roads. So where people have to walk, it's a lot better than what it was 20 years back when to my village I had to walk 3 hours from the nearest road point. Today we at least have a feeder road going there. So that would be my answer, I would say. Like, we have to see how we can, we can't have a straight road. We have to look at opportunities, like using digital tools to actually speed things up. It is slow, but slow and steady, I agree with you. Slow and steady wins the race. And for us, we have to also be mindful that in the need to actually be fast, we do not lose out the development gains in all aspects. And for in a small democracy like ours, like I'm sure many of you know, Bhutan had our first democratic elections only in 2008. We are with our 4th government, and it's long. It's long if you consider 17 years to be long years. If not, it's very short. But again, remembered that we managed to actually have our young school students and young people actually have interaction with parliamentarians, where they spoke to parliamentarians about the issues and challenges they face. Right. So where they are made more inclusive, so everybody knows, like, this is how we empower people to be able to, it's not a tokenization of making sure that, okay, youth or these groups have been included in the conversation, but rather really making them part of the process, that they become integral. So instead of coming at identifying problems and issues that communities face, we are actually having the community at the forefront of everything, in fact, at the center, to actually identify what is it that doesn't work.
Right.
Simple as, just to give an example, like women participation in politics has really fallen down. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like the government saying, okay, we need to have quota. But we have women, some of the elected women leaders saying, if we got into through quota, our values would be questioned. Our worth would be questioned. We got here based on our own worth. The numbers may be small, but we got here fighting that same fight without any quota. So these are some questions we have. So where the men parliamentarians or men elected leaders will not question women's value and the value add in the decision-making process. So these are some things that it can be looked at as both slow and fast. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. We're going to go to questions now. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Nico Balbidina. I'm from the Philippines. I work in a fact-checking organization. It's a very small team. We're a team of 6. That includes me. But still, I believe that we're doing good work because we were also able to get the approval of the IFCN. I think the quickest way to ask my question is what can we do about it? Because we've been doing a lot in the Philippines. We've been fact-checking. We've been doing media information literacy work. We've been doing information campaigns, everything that we can think of, we've tried it, but the curve isn't hitting, Despite years of working, of doing all of this, we are still seeing elections shaped by misinformation. If you've read about it, the past 2 presidencies that we've had are presidencies that are won with disinformation, no? And it's becoming the feeling of the people there, of the journalists and of the fact checkers there. They're beginning to be hopeless. Our students, the trainees that we get, we try to teach them how to do it, and we don't have the results to show them that hey, what we're doing, it's working. Is it a matter of when it hits or when it works, rather than a matter of if it works?
I don't know who wants to answer, but maybe Renee. I mean, you know Maria Reza, right? Yeah, and Maria Reza works on this a lot. I don't know if you have any thoughts. She works so hard to try to move the needle, and it is frustrating.
Well, I mean, I live in the United States right now. We have a tortured relationship to the truth, so. So I'm sympathetic. One of the question of scale is really challenging. This was something that I assume everybody here knows that Meta killed its fact-checking programs in the U.S., not in Europe, for a variety of reasons. Among them, your Digital Services Act. We have looked at questions like where is the intersection between community notes and fact-checking? What are the ways in which those two things? I see them as complementary. I know that not everybody agrees with that, but I do. I think that it is a way for it to scale, per your point, because it is a way for because one of the things that we did see with the fact-checking program in the United States was the challenge of responding quickly enough. The scale piece was immense. This does not mean that fact checks clear in a reasonable amount of time, just to be clear. That is one of the gaps with community nodes. So these two systems, I think, have the potential to be complementary. There's another area of research that's just beginning to emerge, particularly at Google DeepMind, using large language models, particularly what they call the Habermas machine. How many people in here are familiar with that research? One. Oh man, come on, you guys.
That's why you're here.
This paper is worth reading, actually, in all seriousness. If you're following the fact-checking conversation, it's actually very much worth reading because there's some really interesting ways in which large language models solve some of the challenges for why community notes don't clear around expressing fact-checking language neutrally enough that divergent populations agree that the fact check is palatable to them, to divergent populations, right? Which is one of the ways in which the clearing happens and the note shows up where it needs to show up. So it can, in fact, increase both the speed and the throughput of the notes clearing. It's a really interesting application of LLMs, just that it removes the sort of human bias from the language and how the fact check is framed, such that it appears more palatable to the audience, increasing its legitimacy. These are some of the areas where I think you can, in fact, look at ways to leverage technology such that it improves the legitimacy perspective, such that then the resistance to the fact check is not quite so strong. In the US, it's the resistance to the fact check, the fact that the fact check has been so politicized. I know that this is true in the Philippines as well from conversations with Maria. I know that this is not necessarily true everywhere. I don't think Europe is quite so prone to this problem sort of writ large yet. But this dynamic of like, how do you use these different tools available to both scale, increase the output, and then improve the efficacy by incorporating in some of these new models is, I think, worth experimentation, because I don't think that the existing models of the sort of continuing to spin our wheels. In the US, the forcing function has now happened, right? The fact-checking program is dead, and the new model is, the experimentation has begun. And so that's where moving, being slightly ahead of the curve in other places where that hasn't happened yet, maybe affords an opportunity to frame the conversation differently in the negotiation with the platforms and the direction that that's going to go.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, if I could just add on, it would be interesting to know when we talk about fact-checking and the information and the media literacy program, like, what's the approach like? Because when Renee was speaking, I was thinking about our context. In Bhutan's context, we are looking at a population who are not media literate, and we have a lot of people who are who have some literacy kind of thing, but they are not very they're just literate enough to be able to read and write a bit, but not really critical. So it's also about actually knowing your audience. Quite often, I think we tend to think as adults and think for everybody else. But this is where I think, for me personally, it's about empathy. If I were in their position, I were in their condition, like if I came from their background, this is what, when we do our media literacy program, like if you're working with children, we try to come and see how we engage with them. The program, it is mostly like it's exploratory, where we encourage them to actually be part of co-creating, whether it is solutions or even identifying problems. What are the problems that they face? So maybe it would be good to also try knowing your audience and getting to understand their literacy in terms of whether it is fake news and all. Because so for me, my comments are from a very Bhutanese perspective, especially this is critical, especially in a democracy, right? Especially election times. Yeah.
Great. We have time for just one more question. Yes, sir.
Quick, I'm an AI researcher. I study how information spreads on social platforms and try to help people make sense of it. The question I have is around the incentives for getting people to participate in such programs, because I think a lot of the interventions that we call them are structured such that we are placing the burden of responsibility on those already exposed or likely to be exposed to misinformation, whereas no burden is really placed on those who are doing the exposing. Right, so the economics of platforms is I can lie, I can say anything I want online today, and the entire responsibility is placed on either the platform or the users of the platform who are already suffering from the decision error caused by it.
Right.
Are there any thoughts on how we can convey the value of these programs to them from an economic standpoint, so they come in with an understanding that I am going to benefit from this, rather than only realizing that at the end of the program or when they first face these challenges and only then realize, oh, that program was useful to me?
Great. I love this question, and there's not enough time to answer it, but what I'm going to do is something unusual. Hold on. I'm going to give the panelists all the time they need to answer this question, but just so you know, at 5 p.m., the closing ceremony does begin. It will not be live streamed in this room, so if you do want to catch that, you need to go to the Bundeskunsthalle. So let's do that as a compromise, and I thank everyone. If you do want to exit, do so quietly, but yeah, that is a great question, and I think it merits thoughtful answers. So yes, anyone with thoughts?
Meta should take that money that it used to spend in the United States on the fact-checking program and immediately roll it into compensating the people who do their unpaid labor of writing community notes on their platform.
Oh, you did it. Does anyone want to finish, or maybe we should just end there? Okay, we will end there. So thank you very much. Renee, Tandon, and Maria, thank you so much.